Hello, my name is Christopher Morgan. I'm 28 years old, living in a tiny apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, where every morning I wake up to the smell of burning wood from the nearby lumber mill. My life isn't anything special. No big house, no fancy car, no glamorous trips that people love to flaunt on social media. I'm just an ordinary working guy, spending my days loading and unloading goods, coming home at night to the creaking sound of my ceiling fan, wondering if I've been living my life the right way. But if you ask me what has shaped the person I am today, I'd tell you the story of my family and the sacrifices I've made. Sacrifices that sometimes make me question whether they were worth it. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows each other so well you couldn't hide a cold if you tried. My family was poor, so poor that poverty felt like a constant companion, always lingering by our side. My dad, Bruce, was a painter, coming home every day with paint stains on his clothes and hands as rough as tree bark. My mom, Gloria, worked at a bakery in town, always carrying the scent of flour and vanilla, but never earning enough to buy a proper cake for the family. We lived in an old wooden house, with a leaky roof during rain and winters so cold they chilled you to the bone. But despite the hardships, our home was always filled with laughter. Dad told silly jokes, Mom sang off-key folk songs, and my younger brother, Kevin, was always clinging to me, begging to play pretend fighting games. My childhood wasn't filled with expensive toys or fancy outings, but I had my family, and for me that was enough. I remember evenings gathered around the dinner table, sharing a plate of mashed potatoes and a few pieces of discounted chicken Mom got from the market. Kevin, a bright kid with sparkling eyes, would talk about his dreams of becoming an engineer and building skyscrapers. I'd just smile, ruffle his hair, and say, "Keep studying hard and I'll take care of you." Back then, I didn't realize that promise would become a burden I'd carry for years. When I was 17, everything changed. Dad had a work accident, falling from scaffolding, breaking his leg and losing his job. The hospital bills came like a death sentence, and the bank kept hounding us about the mortgage. Mom worked longer hours, but her meager bakery wages barely made a dent. I saw Dad lying on the sofa, his eyes empty, and Mom growing thinner, her hair graying early. Kevin, only 13 at the time, was still carefree, focused on his math homework and big dreams. I knew that if I didn't do something, our family would fall apart. So I decided to drop out of school. The day I told Mom I wasn't going back to school, she cried. She grabbed my hand, saying I was ruining my future, but I just smiled and said, "Mom, I'm not as smart as Kevin. I'll quit school and work so he can keep studying. We'll be okay." Mom hugged me, sobbing, while Dad turned away, silent. I knew he was ashamed, but he'd never admit it. From then on, I worked 2 jobs at once. During the day, I was a laborer on construction sites, my shirt soaked with sweat, my hands and feet bruised from carrying bricks and mixing mortar. At night, I worked the late shift at a supermarket, stocking shelves, mopping floors, and counting the minutes until I could go home and sleep for a few hours before dawn. My life revolved around work, wages, and bills. Every month, I sent almost all my earnings to my parents to pay off debts and buy Kevin's school supplies. I kept nothing for myself except a few old clothes and a small radio to listen to music during lonely night shifts at the supermarket. But I didn't complain. I thought this was what I had to do. As the eldest, I had to carry the load. Kevin excelled in school, always at the top of his class, and every time he showed me his grades, I felt all my exhaustion was worth it. My parents gradually stabilized, though they still lived frugally. Dad found a job as a security guard, and Mom stayed at the bakery. I told myself that as long as my family was okay, a little suffering on my part didn't matter. Then I met Laura, the woman who changed my life for better and for worse. She worked at a coffee shop near the supermarket where I'd stop for a drink after my night shifts. Laura had a radiant smile, warm brown eyes, and a way of talking that made me forget my exhaustion. We started dating, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just living to work. I loved Laura, her laughter, the way she held my hand when we walked by the river. At 22, I proposed to Laura. We got married in a simple ceremony, just family and a few friends. I rented a small apartment, and those early days felt like a dream. Laura made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just a poor working guy. A year later, we welcomed our daughter, Diana. Looking at her tiny eyes staring up at me from her crib, I vowed to give her a better life than I'd had. But dreams don't last forever. Laura started getting frustrated when I sent most of my paycheck to my parents. She said I was prioritizing my family over our own future, over Diana's. I tried to explain that I couldn't abandon my parents, that Kevin was about to start college and needed the money. But every argument left Laura looking at me with disappointment. "Who are you living for, Chris? Your parents or us?" she asked. I couldn't answer because deep down I thought I had to live for everyone. The tension grew. Laura wanted us to save for a house, for Diana to go to a good school. But I had no money, as almost everything I earned went to my parents or to pay off debts. Arguments became routine, and each one felt like it was tearing me in two. I wanted to make Laura happy, but I couldn't turn my back on my family. Finally, after 4 years together, Laura left. She took Diana, who was only 3, and said she couldn't live with someone who only sacrificed for others and neglected his own family. I stood frozen in our apartment, watching her pack her bags, hearing Diana cry for her dad. When the door closed, it felt like my world collapsed. I didn't blame Laura. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was wrong to think I could balance everything. After the divorce, I moved to an even smaller apartment in Cleveland and started working at a lumber mill. The work is grueling, but I don't mind. I'm used to sweating for every dollar. I still send money to my parents, though less than before, because I have to set some aside for Laura to care for Diana. My life is now a repetitive cycle. Work, go home, sleep, repeat. I don't have close friends, no hobbies, no lively drinks with coworkers after a shift. All I own is an old pickup truck and a few worn-out pieces of furniture. But the worst pain isn't the loneliness. It's missing Diana. I know she and Laura live in Erie, Pennsylvania with Laura's parents. Sometimes I drive there just to stand at a distance and watch Diana play at her preschool. I don't dare approach, not wanting to disrupt Laura's new life. Once I left a small doll hanging on Laura's car mirror with a handwritten note. "For Diana. From Dad." I don't know if she got it, but I hope it made her smile. I've never told anyone about those moments watching my daughter from afar, or the nights I sit alone, wondering if my sacrifices were worth it. I dropped out of school, worked myself to the bone, lost my wife and daughter. Also, my family could have a better life. But sometimes I wonder, why am I the only one paying the price? Why can't I have a little happiness for myself? I don't complain, not ever. I just quietly work, quietly live, and quietly endure. But deep inside, I feel a nameless pain, a question that keeps repeating, am I living the right way? Were all my sacrifices worth it? Then an answer came to me one August day when I got a call from Uncle Paul, my dad's younger brother. He said the family was planning a reunion at his new house in the suburbs of Columbus. "The new place is huge, Chris," he said excitedly over the phone, his voice brimming with pride. "David sent money to buy it. The whole family's coming, it'll be fun, you've got to be there, it's been a while." David, Uncle Paul's son and my cousin, is working in California, making good money and regularly sending some back to his parents. I smiled over the phone, saying I'd try to make it, but inside I felt a heavy weight. Family reunions always made me uneasy. I didn't know what to say or do when everyone around me seemed to have made it more than I had. I didn't want to go, honestly. But then Mom called right after, her voice gentle but firm. "Chris, you have to come. The whole family's expecting you. Don't make me ask again." I sighed and agreed. I've never been good at saying no to Mom, though sometimes I wonder if she truly understands what I've done for the family. The day of the reunion arrived with beautiful sunny weather and a rare fresh breeze in Cleveland. I drove my old pickup truck inherited from Dad to Uncle Paul's new house, a spacious 2-story home with a wide, well-kept front yard. The grass was neatly trimmed, the white picket fence gleaming. I parked, looked through the window, and saw everyone already gathered. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even close neighbors. Laughter filled the air, and the smell of grilled meat wafted from the backyard. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of being out of place, and walked in. Inside, the atmosphere was even livelier than I'd expected. Aunt Mary, Dad's cousin, was sharing stories about her recent trip to Europe. Uncle Paul was boasting about his new house, constantly mentioning David, the family's hero. "That kid's busy as hell, but he's making bank," he said, holding a beer, his eyes gleaming. "He's working in Silicon Valley, earning in a month what I made in a year back in the day. Thanks to him, I got this house." Everyone nodded, murmuring in admiration, while I just smiled, sitting quietly in a corner of the dining table, holding a plate of grilled chicken wings. Kevin, my younger brother, was there too. He's 24 now, a college graduate working an office job at an insurance company in downtown Columbus. Seeing him in a crisp dress shirt, hair neatly styled, I couldn't help but feel proud. Kevin was proof that my years of backbreaking work, dropping out of school to give him a chance, had paid off. He shook hands with everyone, flashed a bright smile, and talked about his new job and plans to buy a car. People crowded around him, showering him with praise. "Kevin's the future of the Morgan family," Aunt Mary said, then turned to me, half joking, half serious. "And what about you, Chris? Still working at the lumber mill? When are you going to start your own shop?" I gave an awkward smile, nodded, and tried to swallow the sting in my chest. I didn't blame Aunt Mary. To everyone, I was just Chris, the unremarkable laborer. No degree, no nice house, no success story to share. But I didn't expect them to understand. I just wanted to sit there, eat a family meal, and go back to my life. But the reunion didn't let me off that easily. As the meal wound down and the alcohol kicked in, the mood shifted. Dad, tipsy and sitting across from me, suddenly spoke up, louder than necessary. "Hey, Chris, how's it feel to be the only one in the family with nothing to show for it? No decent job, no future?" He laughed as if it were a harmless joke, and a few people at the table chuckled along like it was all in good fun. My face burned, but I tried to stay calm. I looked down at my plate, biting my lip, telling myself he was just drunk, that he didn't mean it. But he didn't stop. "Look at Kevin," he went on, pointing at my brother. "College graduate, steady job, bright future, and you? 28 years old, still hauling lumber, living in a dumpy apartment. You gonna live like that forever?" The laughter around the table faded. A few curious glances darted my way, but no one said anything. Kevin looked down, seeming uncomfortable, but he didn't speak up either. I gripped my fork tightly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm trying, Dad." But he acted like he didn't hear me and kept going. "Trying? Trying what? Look at David, look at Kevin. Everyone in this family's moving forward except you. You're just standing still, you're embarrassing your mom and me." His words cut like a knife. My chest felt heavy, like someone was pressing down on it. I wanted to stand up, to yell that I'd sacrificed everything for this family, that I dropped out of school, worked 2 jobs, paid off their debts, and funded Kevin's education. But I couldn't say it. I just sat there, my face stiff, swallowing the anger and pain rising in my throat. Mom, sitting next to Dad, didn't defend me. Instead, she added, her voice soft but sharp. "Chris, we know you're trying, but you can't keep living like this forever. David bought this house for Paul. I just wish you could be half as successful as him and I'd be content." I looked at her, hoping to find some warmth, some acknowledgement of what I'd done. But her eyes held only disappointment, as if I were a stain on the family. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing heavy, my hands clenched under the table until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to stand up, to walk out, to scream that they had no right to talk about me like that. But I stayed there, silent, as I had done for years. The laughter and chatter around the table resumed, as if the words just spoken were nothing more than a harmless joke. Aunt Mary went on about her trip to Italy. Uncle Paul bragged more about David, and Kevin, my brother, kept his head down, quietly picking at his food as if he wanted no part in the mess. I looked around, seeing everyone immersed in their own world, a world I didn't seem to belong to. I was invisible, the one who'd sacrificed my entire life so they could sit here laughing without a single one of them noticing. Then Dad, still tipsy, spoke up again. He pointed at me, his voice loud enough to silence the room. "Chris, listen to me. You can't keep living like a failure forever. No house, no car, not even a decent job. You're truly the shame of the Morgan family." He emphasized the last word as if he wanted the whole world to know I was a disappointment. In that moment, something inside me broke. I felt a fire ignite, burning through all the patience I'd held onto for years. I stood up abruptly, the wooden chair screeching loudly. All eyes turned to me, but I didn't care anymore. I'd stayed silent too long, swallowed too much pain. It was time to speak. "Dad, Mom, everyone," I began, my voice trembling. Not from fear, but from the anger and pain surging like a tidal wave. "You think I'm a failure? Think I haven't done anything? Let me tell you what I've done." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I dropped out of school at 17. Not because I didn't want to study, but because I had to work so you wouldn't lose the house, so Kevin could keep going to school. I worked 2 jobs at once, construction during the day, stocking shelves at the supermarket at night, to pay off your debts, to cover Kevin's tuition, to help Dad with medical bills when he fell off that scaffolding. The room fell deathly silent. Aunt Mary stopped chewing. Uncle Paul set his beer down, and Kevin looked up, eyes wide. I stared straight at Dad, who sat there, face flushed from alcohol, but his eyes starting to waver. "I did all of that," I continued, my voice steadier now, "and kept nothing for myself. No house, no car, not even a day off. I worked until I was exhausted, until my hands and feet bled, just so this family could have a better life. And now you call me a failure? Say I'm a shame?" I turned to Mom, who was looking down, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Mom, do you know I sacrificed my own family? Laura left me, took Diana, my daughter, because I gave all my money, time, and energy to take care of you and Dad, to support Kevin. I lost my wife, my daughter, because I thought I had to put this family above everything. And now you say you wish I were half as successful as David? Do you know David didn't have to drop out, didn't have to work 2 jobs, didn't have to give up his whole life like I did?" My voice rang out, not loud, but each word hit like a hammer in the silence. I felt hot tears prick my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted them to see, to know how much I'd hurt. "I never complained," I said, my voice hoarse. "I never asked for anything. I just wanted this family to be okay, but now I see, maybe everything I did means nothing to you." Aunt Mary stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't believe what I'd said. Uncle Paul shook his head, muttering something to his wife. Kevin looked at me, his eyes red, but he said nothing. Mom lifted her head, her eyes glistening as if she wanted to say something, but then she looked away, avoiding me. "Chris, don't talk like that," she finally said, her voice weak. "You're the eldest. It's your responsibility. Everyone has to sacrifice for family." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. Responsibility? I'd lived my entire life for that responsibility, and now she spoke as if it were nothing special, as if I'd only done what was expected. I let out a bitter laugh, void of any joy. "Responsibility?" I repeated. "So what's your responsibility to me? To sit here in front of everyone and call me a failure? To never once ask what I've been through?" Dad, as if his pride had been wounded, slammed the table and stood up. "You dare talk to your parents like that?" he roared, his voice booming like thunder. "You ungrateful, disrespectful brat. I raised you, fed you, sent you to school, and now you stand here criticizing us? Get out of here now." I stood there, looking at the man I'd once respected, the man I'd sacrificed everything to help through tough times. I wanted to say more, to scream all the frustrations bottled up inside, but I knew it was pointless. They didn't understand, and maybe they never would. I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. Dad's voice still echoed behind me, but I couldn't make out the words anymore. All I could hear was my heart pounding and a small voice in my head. "Enough, Chris. Enough." I stepped into the yard, breathing in the cool evening air. Footsteps followed, and when I turned, I saw Kevin running after me. "Chris," he called, his voice choked. "Don't go. It's just a misunderstanding. Dad and Mom, they just—" He trailed off as if he couldn't find the words. I looked at Kevin, the brother I'd given up my youth for so he could have the life he has today. I wanted to be angry, to blame him for staying silent when our parents insulted me. But looking into his red, teary eyes, I only saw the little boy who used to cling to me, begging to play pretend fighting games. "It's okay, Kevin," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "I just need time." I got in my truck, started the engine, and drove off. Uncle Paul's house faded in the rearview mirror, along with the laughter, the mockery, and the sacrifices I'd thought would earn me respect. I didn't know where to go or what to do, only that I couldn't stay there a second longer. I drove aimlessly, staring at the road ahead while my mind replayed my parents' accusations and taunts. A cold emptiness crept into my chest, bringing with it a suffocating sense of helplessness. I'd spoken the truth, poured out everything I'd kept inside for years, but it changed nothing. My parents still thought I was ungrateful. My relatives still saw me as a failure. And I was still just Chris, the laborer living in a rundown apartment with nothing but a heart full of scars. When I got back to my apartment, I collapsed into a chair, closed my eyes, and tried to push away the image of the reunion, but it clung to me. I wondered, is this the end? Can I keep living like this, sacrificing without recognition? Or is it time I start living for myself? Those questions swirled in my head like a relentless storm. I opened my eyes, staring at the small empty room, the creaky old bed, the battered wooden table, and the radio still crackling with a song I didn't bother listening to. This was my world, built from the scraps of money left after sending most of it to my parents, to Diana. But now, it felt like a prison, trapping me in the pain I hadn't dared to face. The words I'd spoken at the reunion echoed in my mind. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up and told the truth about my sacrifices. I'd hoped, even just a little, that my parents would reconsider, that they'd realize what I'd done for the family. I imagined Mom calling, her voice choked with an apology, or Dad, stubborn as he is, saying something to mend things. But my phone stayed silent. No calls, no messages. Just the creaking ceiling fan and the distant hum of traffic outside. In the nights that followed, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering where I'd gone wrong. I'd dropped out of school, worked 2 jobs, paid off my parents' debts, funded Kevin's education, even sacrificed my own little family. But what did I get in return? Mockery, disappointed looks, and the feeling that I was nothing to them. I started thinking about the money I still sent to my parents every month. Even though my income was so tight I had to count every penny to survive. Why was I still doing it? Why was I still chaining myself to a responsibility they didn't even value? After many sleepless nights, I made a decision I'd never dared to consider before. I would stop. I wouldn't send money to my parents anymore. Not because I hated them, but because I needed to live for myself, even just once. I needed to break free from this cycle of meaningless sacrifice. I wrote a short message to Mom. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I can't send money anymore. I need to live for myself and for Diana." I hit send, my heart pounding, feeling like I'd just cut a cord that had bound me for years. I thought they'd understand, or at least call to talk. But no. 2 days later, while I was working at the lumber mill, I heard a commotion at the gate. A coworker, Joe, ran up to me looking panicked. "Chris, your parents are out there. They're saying something to everyone. It sounds intense. You better go check." My heart stopped. My parents here? I dropped what I was doing and rushed to the gate, unsure whether to hope or fear. When I got there, I saw Mom and Dad standing at the mill's entrance, surrounded by a crowd of curious co-workers. Dad, in his worn-out shirt, was shouting, his voice thick with anger. "That Chris, he's abandoned his family. We raised him, fed him, sent him to school, and now he dares turn his back on us, cutting off our support. What an ungrateful wretch." Mom stood beside him, clutching his arm, her voice shrill with resentment. He's a bad son, only caring about himself, not his parents. We need money to live, to pay for medical bills, and he doesn't even care." I stood frozen, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. Their words weren't just insults, they were a distortion of the truth. They didn't mention the years I worked myself to exhaustion, the debts I paid off for them, the fact that I sacrificed my own family. They painted me as a selfish, disloyal son. My co-workers, people I'd worked with for years, now looked at me with curious eyes, whispering among themselves. Joe patted my shoulder, murmuring, "What's going on, Chris? Is what they're saying true?" I didn't answer Joe. A wave of humiliation surged through me, not because of what my parents said, but because I'd let them put me in this position in front of the people I saw every day. I stepped forward, my voice hoarse. "Mom, Dad, how could you do this? Why are you treating me so cruelly after everything I've done for you?" Mom looked at me, her eyes no longer filled with the disappointment from the reunion, but with anger. "You think sending a few bucks settles your responsibility? You're the eldest, you're supposed to take care of us. Now I'm sick, your dad's working himself to death, and you dare abandon us? You're ungrateful," Dad cut in, pointing at me. "Who do you think you are, cutting us off? You want this family to starve? I'm ashamed to have a son like you." Their words were like knives plunging deep into my heart. I wanted to scream, to tell them I'd sacrificed my youth, my own family, to support them. But I couldn't speak. I just stood there, surrounded by curious stares and whispers, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I turned to Joe, still standing beside me, and said quietly, "Tell Tom I'm quitting." Joe looked at me, shocked. "Chris, are you sure? You don't have to do this." But I just shook my head. I couldn't stay here, where my parents' story would spread like a stain. I went back to my apartment, packed the few things I owned, some clothes, the old radio, and a photo of Diana that Laura had sent. I looked at the picture, her big round eyes staring back at me, and I felt a flicker of strength return. I couldn't keep living like this, couldn't let my family drag me down further. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could find myself again. The small room in Cleveland, with the smell of burning wood from the mill and the creaking ceiling fan, was no longer where I belonged. I'd lived too long for others, and now I needed to live for myself, if only to know I was still capable of it. I loaded my old pickup truck with a few bags of belongings and drove east toward Erie, Pennsylvania. I had no clear plan, only the knowledge that Laura and Diana were living there with her parents, Wayne and Amanda. I didn't want to intrude or disrupt their peaceful life, but just being near Diana, even if it meant watching her play from a distance, was enough to make my heart feel alive. I drove through winding roads, past golden cornfields glowing under the August sun, and for the first time in years, I felt a hint of freedom. Not complete freedom. The scars from the reunion and my parents' words still lingered, but a small spark, enough to make me believe I could start over. When I arrived in Erie, I found a small room near the waterfront in a working-class neighborhood with low wooden houses and vibrant red maple trees. The room wasn't anything special, a single bed, a small table, and a window overlooking the lake. But the steady, gentle sound of waves crashing each night brought me more peace than the sleepless nights in Cleveland. Standing by the window, breathing in the salty air, I told myself, this is my chance, a new beginning. I started looking for work. After a few days of asking around, I landed a job as a maintenance technician at a port services company in Erie. The work wasn't easy, fixing machinery, inspecting equipment, and sometimes loading cargo when they were short-handed. But it was steady. The pay was enough for me to live comfortably without counting every penny like before. I stopped sending money to my parents, and though the decision gnawed at me, it also brought a sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, I kept my money for myself, to buy a new pair of shoes when my old ones wore out, to eat a proper dinner instead of instant noodles, to live like a human, not a machine. In my early days in Erie, I kept to myself. I wasn't used to talking to strangers or opening up, but the job at the port forced me to interact. I worked alongside tough men and women who didn't mind sweating and were always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. One of them, a guy named Miguel, became my first friend there. A few years older than me with curly black hair and an infectious smile. Miguel would invite me for a beer after shifts. At first I declined, but eventually I gave in. We'd sit at a small bar near the port, listening to the waves and talking about everything from football to everyday life. For the first time, I felt less alone. I began building a new life bit by bit. I joined a local amateur soccer team playing on weekends. I wasn't great, but running on the grass, hearing the cheers and laughter of teammates reminded me of childhood days when Kevin and I played pretend fighting in our yard. I bought used books from a shop near the port, mostly adventure novels, and read them on sleepless nights. I discovered I loved reading, losing myself in stories about people who dared to step out of their comfort zones. It made me think maybe I could do that too. My mental health slowly improved. Without the pressure of sending money home, without mom's reproachful calls, without nights of tormenting myself over whether I was living right, I started finding joy in small things. A sunny morning, a hot cup of coffee, or Miguel's laughter as he told stories about his son. But deep down, I still missed Diana. I knew she was in Erie, just a few miles away, but I didn't dare approach. I was afraid of disturbing Laura, of disrupting their lives. Sometimes I'd drive by Diana's preschool, watching from a distance as she played, her hair tied in a ponytail, her smile bright as the sun. Each time I felt both joy and heartache. Then one day I got a text from Laura. It was brief. "Chris, I know you're in Erie. If you want to see Diana, just let me know." My heart raced as I read it. I didn't know how she found out, maybe through a mutual acquaintance, or maybe she'd seen me near the preschool. I sat for hours thinking. I wanted to see Diana, to hold her, to tell her I loved her. But I was scared. Scared I wasn't worthy, scared I'd hurt Laura again. Finally, I mustered the courage to call Laura. The conversation was short but less tense than I'd expected. She said Diana often asked about her dad, that she missed me, even though she was too young to understand everything. Laura suggested I come to her parents' house that weekend to see Diana in a friendly setting. I agreed, though I was still nervous. The day came and I stood in front of Wayne and Amanda's cozy wooden house, its garden bursting with flowers. I wore my cleanest shirt, holding a doll I'd bought for Diana. When Laura opened the door, she looked much the same, with her warm brown eyes, though now with faint lines at the corners. "Come in, Chris," she said softly. I stepped inside and saw Diana, now 5, playing with a puzzle set. She looked up, saw me, and broke into a radiant smile. "Daddy!" she cried, running to hug me. I knelt down, holding her tightly, feeling like the world stopped. The smell of her hair, her chirpy voice, the way she clung to me, it made me want to cry. I spent the afternoon playing with Diana, listening to her talk about school, her grandparents' dog, and the pictures she drew. Laura sat nearby, not saying much, but I sensed she no longer held the anger she once did. Wayne and Amanda treated me kindly, inviting me to stay for dinner. It was the first family meal I'd had in years, and though it wasn't the family I'd once dreamed of, it was enough to warm my heart. In the weeks that followed, I started seeing Diana more regularly. Laura agreed to let me visit her on weekends, and slowly, we began talking more. Not to rekindle our relationship, but to build a healthy one for Diana's sake. Laura told me she'd settled into her life, working at an insurance company and studying for a certification. I shared about my job at the port, my soccer games, and how I was trying to live for myself. She smiled and said, "You look different, Chris. Lighter." And she was right. I felt lighter. Not because I'd forgotten what happened with my family, but because I was learning to let go. I still thought about my parents, about Kevin, but I no longer let them define who I was. I found joy in my new life, jogging along the waterfront, reading books, laughing with Miguel, and above all, moments with Diana. I was no longer the Chris who silently endured. I was Chris, a father, a friend, a man trying to rediscover himself. But I knew deep down I hadn't fully let go. The scars from the reunion from my parents' words lingered. I wondered if I could ever truly forget or if I'd carry that pain forever. But every time I saw Diana's smile, every time I heard the waves crash against the shore, I felt closer to a better version of myself. And that for me was enough. Life in Erie wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A life I chose not out of duty or pressure, but because I wanted to rediscover myself. I had my job at the port, new friends like Miguel, and weekend afternoons with Diana. Those things made me feel alive, truly alive, for the first time in years. Then Christmas came. I was invited to Wayne and Amanda's house for dinner with Laura and Diana. It was a cold evening, but warm, with twinkling lights and the scent of pine from the Christmas tree in the living room. Diana, now 5, ran around the house with an oversized Santa hat slipping over her head, giggling as I pretended to let her catch me in a game of tag. Laura sat on the couch watching us with a gentle, meaningful smile. Amanda bustled in the kitchen preparing a roast turkey, while Wayne recounted stories from his days as a sailor, his deep, warm voice blending with the soft Christmas music. During dinner, as we raised our glasses for a toast, my thoughts drifted to my parents. Despite my efforts to bury their memory, they surfaced. I remembered Christmases from my childhood. Mom baking gingerbread cookies, Dad, exhausted from work, still managing to make a small Christmas tree from dry branches. Those memories, though sweet, were laced with the pain of their words at the reunion, their public shaming of me at the mill. I wondered what they were doing, if they ever thought of me, or if I'd truly become the ungrateful son in their eyes. I tried to push those thoughts aside, focusing on Diana, on her excitement as she opened her gifts, a puzzle set from me and a doll from Laura. But as dinner ended and Diana fell asleep on the couch, Laura looked at me as if reading my mind. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, not wanting to lie. "I don't know, Laura. I've tried to let go, but they're still my parents." Laura nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I know, but you can't let them pull you back. You've done enough, Chris. More than enough." I smiled, grateful for her understanding, but my heart was a tangle of emotions. Love, anger, and a naive hope that things could be different. A few days later, I decided to drive to Columbus to visit Uncle Paul and check on my parents. I didn't want to contact them directly or face them, but I needed to know how they were. I told myself it would be a short visit, just to ease my mind. Then I'd return to Erie and my new life. When I arrived, Uncle Paul was in the backyard fixing the fence. He looked up, surprised, and grinned. "Chris, long time no see, kid." He clapped me on the shoulder, pulled me inside, poured a cup of coffee, and started catching up. But when I asked about my parents, his tone grew serious. "They're not doing so great, Chris," he said, his eyes filled with concern. "Your mom's sick, high blood pressure, and some heart issues. The doctor prescribed meds, but they're expensive, and money's, well, you know." He paused, sipped his coffee, and continued. "Your dad's taken on extra work driving a delivery truck at night, even though he's not as strong as he used to be. They've been asking me for loans, but I can only help so much." I sat in silence, feeling like someone was squeezing my heart. Mom's sick? Dad working nights? I pictured Dad with his gray hair and trembling hands driving through the cold night. I pictured Mom, who used to sing off-key folk songs, now reliant on costly pills. I felt both pity and anger. Pity because they were my parents. Anger because of their insults, their public humiliation of me, their refusal to ever apologize. Uncle Paul went on, his voice quieter. "Kevin's busy. He's got a new girlfriend, still living in downtown Columbus, doesn't visit them much. He sends money sometimes, but not regularly. Your parents complain about it a lot." I listened, a bitter taste in my mouth. Kevin, the brother I'd sacrificed my youth to put through college, was now too busy to care for our parents. I didn't blame him. He had his own life, but I couldn't help feeling the unfairness. I'd done everything to keep this family afloat, and now they needed me again, yet still hadn't acknowledged what I'd done. Uncle Paul looked at me, his eyes suggesting something unspoken. "Chris, the family still needs you," he said carefully. "But I know they haven't treated you fairly. I'm not defending them, but I think maybe they don't know how to say sorry." I nodded, saying nothing. His words were like a needle pricking at the unhealed scars in my heart. I wanted to believe my parents still needed me, that they loved me in some way. But I couldn't forget what had happened, couldn't erase how they'd made me feel like a failure. I left Uncle Paul's house and drove back to Erie in silence. My mind was a mess. I felt for Mom, worried about her health. I worried for Dad, old and still working grueling hours. But I was also angry that they never recognized my sacrifices, angry that they'd shamed me at the mill, angry that they still saw me as an ungrateful son. I wondered if I should go back, if I should help them again. Or should I keep living my new life, where I'd finally found some peace? In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about my parents. I remembered the tough years when I worked myself to exhaustion to pay their debts, to fund Kevin's education. I remembered Mom's tears when I told her I was dropping out, Dad's ashamed glance as he turned away. Those memories stung, but they also reminded me that I'd done enough. I'd given everything I had, and I couldn't keep sacrificing forever. I called Laura and told her about my visit to Uncle Paul. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said simply, "You don't owe them anything anymore, Chris. But if you want to help, do it for you, not for them." Her words were like a small light, helping me see more clearly. I didn't want to fall back into the old cycle of living to please others. But I also didn't want to carry the guilt of abandoning my parents. I sat in my small room listening to the waves crash outside the window. I looked at Diana's photo, thought of her smile, of the afternoons we spent playing together. I thought of the new life I was building, my friends like Miguel, the small joys I'd found, and I wondered, could I help my parents without losing myself? Was there a way to heal without sacrificing my happiness? I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time I felt I had the right to choose, not out of duty, but because I wanted to. And that, though just a small step, made me feel lighter than ever before. The days after returning from Uncle Paul's house were filled with a tangled mix of pity and anger. The images of Mom, frail and sick, Dad, aged and working nights, and Uncle Paul's hint that the family still needs you kept circling in my mind. I wanted to help them, to do something so Mom could afford her medicine, so Dad wouldn't have to drive a truck in the cold night. But every time I thought about reopening that closed door, I remembered the fateful reunion. My parents' words at the mill gate, how they called me an ungrateful wretch. I wondered, could I help them without falling back into that painful cycle? The nights that followed were nearly sleepless. I sat by the window listening to the waves crash against the Erie shore, trying to find a way through the mess of emotions. At times I thought about calling my parents, offering a small sum enough for Mom's medicine. But then fear crept in, fear that they'd see it as something I had to do, that they wouldn't appreciate it, wouldn't apologize, and I'd be pulled back into the endless loop of duty and hurt. I didn't want to return to the old Chris, the one who lived only to please others, who sacrificed his own small family for the larger one. Finally, I gathered my courage, picked up the phone, and called Dad. It was the first time I'd contacted him since leaving Cleveland, since cutting ties after the scene at the mill. When Dad answered, his voice was curt, as if he were still angry. "Chris, what do you want?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, I heard from Uncle Paul about how things are with you and Mom. I want to know how she's doing, and I want to talk." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Dad said, his tone still hard, "Your mom's sick, but she's managing. And you're only thinking of us now, after abandoning us?" His words hit like a punch, but I didn't let them shake me. I was prepared for this. "Dad, I didn't abandon you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I did everything I could. I dropped out of school, worked 2 jobs, paid off your debts, funded Kevin's college. I lost my own family because I put you and Mom first. But I never got any recognition from you, not even a thank you. Instead, you went to the mill, called me ungrateful in front of everyone. I can't keep living like that." Dad was silent. I heard a heavy sigh through the phone, but he didn't speak. I continued. "I can help, Dad, but it'll be limited, and I need you and Mom to change. I need you to respect me, to acknowledge what I've done. If not, I can't keep doing this." My words hung in the air. My heart pounded as if I'd just run a mile. I was afraid Dad would yell again, call me ungrateful. But he didn't. He only said, his voice lower, "I'll think about it." Then he hung up without another word. I sat there, still gripping the phone, feeling like a heavy weight had lifted from my chest. I didn't know what Dad would do, if he'd actually think about it or just said it to end the call. But I knew I'd done the right thing. For the first time, I'd set my boundaries, not as a son fulfilling a duty, but as a person who wanted respect. In the days that followed, I waited. I didn't expect a miracle, didn't expect my parents to suddenly change. But I hoped, even just a little, that they'd understand. I kept working at the port, playing soccer with Miguel and the amateur team and spending time with Diana. Every time I saw her smile, I felt I'd been right to choose to live for myself, to set boundaries, to protect myself. But I couldn't deny that I still worried about Mom, still thought about Dad, and still hoped that one day my family could heal. Each night I returned to my small room, listening to the waves and thinking about the call with Dad. I wondered if he was really thinking about it or if he'd just said it to placate me. I wondered if Mom, with her illness, knew I'd called, knew I still cared. And I wondered if I could find a way to help them without losing myself. I didn't have immediate answers, but for the first time in my life I stood at a crossroads and I had the right to choose my path. Not out of duty, but because I wanted to. I was no longer the Chris who silently endured, who only knew sacrifice. I was Chris, a father, a friend, a man learning to love himself, and maybe one day a son whose family would value him. The call with Dad left me with a mix of emotions. Relief for having said what needed to be said, but also a heavy weight from his silence. I didn't know if he'd truly think about it or if he'd just said so to end the conversation. But I knew that for the first time I'd set boundaries, made clear what I wanted, and that made me feel like I was living, truly living, not just existing. A week passed and I settled back into my routine in Erie. I worked at the port, fixing machinery, loading cargo, and joking with Miguel during breaks. I played soccer on weekends, feeling the sweat roll down my forehead and hearing the cheers from my teammates. I spent time with Diana, playing with her, listening to her talk about the pictures she drew at preschool. Those moments, though small, were the bricks building my new life, a life I chose for myself. But I couldn't deny that I still thought about my parents. Every time I looked at Diana, I remembered the tough years when I worked myself to exhaustion so my parents could get by, so Kevin could go to college. I remembered Mom's tearful hug when I told her I was dropping out, Dad's ashamed glance as he turned away, unable to provide for the family. Those memories, painful as they were part of me. I wanted to believe my parents still loved me in their own way, but I also knew that love wasn't enough without respect. Then one morning, as I was getting ready for work, I received a letter. Not a text, not a call, but a handwritten letter sent through the mail, with Mom's familiar handwriting. I stood frozen in my small room, holding the envelope, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to expect, an apology, another reproach, or just another plea for help. I sat at the table, took a deep breath, and opened it. "Chris, my son," the letter began, the handwriting shaky as if written through emotion. "I know you're angry with us, and I don't blame you. I heard what you said in the call with your dad. I've thought a lot, and I realize I was wrong. I never told you how proud I am of you, how much you've sacrificed for the family. I'm sorry, Chris. I'm sorry for not seeing what you did, for letting you feel alone." I read on, tears streaming down my cheeks. Mom wrote about her illness, the expensive pills, and how Dad was working nights to make ends meet. She said they didn't expect me to sacrifice like before, that they just wanted to mend things, to have me back, even if just to talk. "I don't need your money, Chris," she wrote. "I just need you. I want our family to be like it was, but I know that takes time. If you're willing, I'll wait." I folded the letter and sat in silence for hours. Mom's apology, though late, was what I'd longed for, but it also left me conflicted. I wanted to believe she meant it, that she and Dad would change, but I was afraid that if I opened my heart, I'd be pulled back into the old cycle of sacrifice without recognition. I thought of Laura's words, "Do it for you, not for them." I thought of Diana, her smile, the new life I was building. And I asked myself, could I mend things with my parents without losing myself? I took the letter to the beach, standing by the shore, watching the waves roll in, the sunlight glinting on the water. I thought back to the tough years when I worked myself to the bone to keep the family afloat. I remembered the times I stood from afar watching Diana, too afraid to approach. I recalled the sleepless nights, wondering if my sacrifices were worth it. And now, with Mom's words in hand, I felt something stir inside me. Not immediate forgiveness, not readiness to return, but a small spark of hope that maybe one day we could find a way to understand each other. I didn't reply to the letter right away. I needed time to think, to weigh my options. I wanted to help Mom, to make sure she had her medicine, but I also wanted to protect the life I'd built in Erie. I wanted to be a good father to Diana, a good friend to Miguel, and above all, a better version of myself. I didn't want to go back to being the Chris who silently endured, but I also didn't want to completely cut ties with my family. In the days that followed, I carried the letter with me, rereading it whenever I felt confused. I talked to Laura and Miguel, sharing the letter and my thoughts. Laura smiled, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You'll find a way, Chris. You always do." Miguel, with his signature grin, said simply, "Listen to your heart, but don't let it wear you out, buddy." Their encouragement, though simple, made me feel less alone. I started thinking about a plan. Maybe I'd send Mom a small amount, enough for her medicine, but I wouldn't let myself fall back into the cycle of sacrifice. Maybe I'd write back, saying I was open to talking, but only if my parents respected me and acknowledged what I'd done. Maybe I'd invite them to Erie, to see my new life, to see how I'd changed. But these were all just maybes. I wasn't ready to decide, wasn't ready to fully reopen that door. I stood on the beach, looking out at the horizon where the sun was setting, painting the sea a brilliant orange. I thought about my journey, from a boy who dropped out to support his family, to a husband who failed in marriage, to a father learning to love his daughter, and now, a man searching for meaning in his life. I thought about my parents, Kevin, the scars and the glimmers of hope. I wondered if I should go back, give my family another chance, or keep walking my own path. I didn't have a clear answer, but standing there amid the sound of waves and the glow of the sunset, I felt a strange sense of peace. I knew that whatever path I chose, I'd choose it for myself, for Diana, and for a future I deserved. I tucked the letter into my pocket, took a deep breath, and walked away, leaving behind questions without answers. My life, though imperfect, lay ahead, and for the first time I felt ready to face it.